Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Janavalabha Jaya Girivaradhari Jaya Girivaradhari Jaya Gopi Janavalabha Jaya Girivaradhari Jaya Girivaradhari Jaya Girivaradhari Jaya Girivaradhari Jayo Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana 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 Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Vihari Jai Ram Vishnu Pada Paramahansa Parivrajikacharya Stotra Sata Shri Madhavai Charanarindra Bhaktivedanta Swami Shiva Prabhupada Ki Shri Shri Radha Madhava Sakhi Ki Jai Shri Shri Panchatattva Ki Jai Shiva Prabhupada Ki Jai Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Samaveta Bhaktavrinda Ki Jai All glories to the assembly devotees All glories to the assembly devotees All glories to the assembly devotees All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Gauranga Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraye Nashta Prayeshvabhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavatyutama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naistiki. So today we are reading Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 5, The Cause of All Causes, text number 7 and 8. Etan me prichataha sarvam sarvagya sakaleshvaraha vijanihi yatha idam aham buddhye anushashitaha etan me prichatah sarvam etan me prichatah sarvam sarvagya sakaleshvaraha sarvagya sakaleshvara Vijanihi yathaivedam Vijanihi yathaivedam Aham buddhe nushasitaha Aham buddhe nushasitaha Etan me prichatah sarvam Sarvagya sakaleshvara Vijanihi yathaivedam Aham buddhe nushasitaha. Next please. So we'll read also the verse number 7, the previous verse. Sabhavana charad ghoram yat tapah susamahitaha tena kedayase nastvam parashankam cha yachasi. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki. Yet we are moved to wonder about the existence of someone more powerful than you when we think of your great austerities in perfect discipline, although your good self is so powerful in the matter of creation. Purport. Following in the footsteps of Sri Narada Muni, one should not blindly accept his spiritual master as God himself. A spiritual master is duly respected on a par with God. But a spiritual master claiming to be God himself should at once be rejected. Narada Muni accepted Brahma as the supreme due to Lord Brahma's wonderful acts in creation. But doubts arose in him when he saw that Lord Brahma also worshipped some superior authority. The supreme is supreme, and he has no worshipable superior. The Ahangrahopasita, or the one who worships himself with the idea of becoming God himself, is misleading. But the intelligent disciple can at once detect that the Supreme God does not need to worship anyone, including himself, in order to become God. Ahangrahopasana may be one of the processes for transcendental realization, but the Ahangrahopasita can never be God. No one becomes God by undergoing the process of transcendental realization. Narada Muni thought of Brahmaji as the supreme person, but when he saw Brahmaji engaged in a process of transcendental realization, doubts arose in him. So he wanted to be clearly informed. In the translation of today's verse, my dear Father, you know everything, and you are the controller of all, Sarvagya Sakalesvara. Therefore, may all that I have inquired from you be kindly instructed to me, etam me prichatah sarvam, so that I may be able to understand it as your student. Vijanihi yathar vedam aham buddhe anushasita. Purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Prabhupada. The inquiries made by Narada Muni are very important for everyone concerned, and as such, Narada requested Brahmaji to deem them suitable so that all others who may come in the line of the cyclic succession of Brahma Sampradaya may also know them properly without any difficulty. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Nitinamine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Vanchakalpatarubhescha Kripa Sindhubhyev cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama Rama Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama, Hare Hare. Antah pravishya mama vachim imam prasuktam sanjeevaya dakila shaktidara swadham nanyam shahasta charana sravana tvagadim pranam namo bhagavate purushaya dubhim svasyastu vishwasya khalah prasidatam dhyantu buddham shivam vitrodhya manascha badram vajatha tadokshacha yeshatam no mati atyaharitu ki. So the today's verse, etan me prichatah sarvam sarvagyas khaleshvara Vijanihi yathai vedam aham buddhye shasitaha. My dear Father, you know everything, and you are the controller of all. Therefore, may all that I have inquired from you be kindly instructed to me, so that I may be able to understand it as your student. So we're reading the second canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, and the second canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, the main topic of the second canto of Srimad Bhagavatam is sadhana tattva. Before first and second canto of Srimad Bhagavatam serve as some sort of introduction to the whole work, and therefore in these two very important cantos of Srimad Bhagavatam, the whole methodology of understanding Srimad Bhagavatam is being elaborately described. And the main point, of course, of the second canto of Srimad Bhagavatam is that ultimately we have to adopt Bhakti sadhana. If we want to understand the absolute truth, there is no other way, there is no other process. There is only one process by which the absolute truth can be known. This is the process of that absolute truth has to reveal himself to us. There is no other way to understand absolute truth by the relative truth. We are being infinitesimal living entities. We're relative. We don't know anything, we are ignorant. But we do have this innate, very deeply rooted desire to understand the absolute truth. Everyone has this desire. When we are more or less done with all these concerns of material life, this desire becomes more and more prominent. When we understand that ultimately the process of sense gratification is tedious and not really interesting, then this inquiry, inquisitiveness comes in the forefront of our existence. And therefore, this second canto is explaining that the only way to understand the absolute truth is to ask somebody who knows the absolute truth. Actually, the whole Bhakti sadhana is graphically described in these chapters of Srimad Bhagavatam, where first the sages of Naimisharanya ask Sutta Goswami. Sutta Goswami says, I will tell you how Maharaja Parikshit asked Shukadeva Goswami. And Shukadeva Goswami, when Maharaja Parikshit asked him the question, he said, okay, I will tell you how Narada Muni asked Brahma. And then Brahma will tell us how he himself asked the Supreme Lord. So this is the process, this is how it works. The only way to understand the Supreme Truth is to ask. To ask somebody who knows, and for that the proper etiquette is established. Here, Narada Muni very humbly is asking Brahmaji about the truth. And he says, you're Sarvagya and you're Sakaleshvara, you're the Supreme Lord, you're the Lord of everything which is there, and you know everything. So this is the first prerequisite. First prerequisite to get the knowledge from the superior source is to approach him in a very respectful way. Basically, bhakti process works when there is a proper relationship between the inquirer and the one being inquired, and that's the relationship of somebody who is superior, who has to give mercy. You have to get the mercy, and to get the mercy, you have to deserve the mercy. Of course, the mercy by definition is something which you don't deserve. That's true. But still, there is a little prerequisite to get the mercy. That's the respect from somebody who is expecting the mercy. If you expect the mercy and at the same time you're totally disrespectful, there is very little hope that you get the mercy. Of course, you may. Somebody who is merciful still nevertheless can bestow mercy upon you, but the little prerequisite, which is important, and actually very simple prerequisite, is established here in this conversation between Narada Muni and before in the conversation between the sages of Misharanya and Sutta Goswami, between Maharaja Parikshit and Shukadeva Goswami. We have to really, first of all, we have to be sure that somebody whom we inquire knows the truth. That's for sure, and therefore he has to be superior to us. And then we have to approach him in a very humble mood, as Narada Muni is doing here. And the process of inquiry, and actually we can see the whole Bhakti literature is based on this process. If we take Bhagavad Gita is what? It's the questions of Arjuna and answers of Krishna himself. So that's very important for us. We have to become students. We have to become students of the absolute truth, and we have to inquire again and again about the nature of the absolute truth. And another very important point here, which Prabhupada is explaining, is that at the same time, Narada Muni, being very polite, very respectful, very humble in approaching Brahmaji, expresses his doubt very openly. It's another very great and very important lessons for every one of us. We may have doubts, and we should not be shy to express our doubts, even if these doubts are very fundamental. Sometimes we being shy and we want to present ourselves better than we are in reality. But we should be quite open, and being open means to express doubts, because the very fact that we're asking means that we don't know. So this is very humiliating itself, because usually when people ask, there is very common type of questions when somebody asks, and before asking he explains everything which he already knows. And then at the end, very generously, he asks, am I right? Of course, that is already established. That's taken for granted. But in reality, the process of inquiry means to admit, I don't know. To admit, I'm ignorant. To admit that I need to know. And at the same time, it basically means that you have to very openly and very frankly say, express your doubts. Because ignorance, the lack of knowledge, means that you have some doubts. Even though it is said that doubting is the function of intelligence, in the third canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, Kapila Muni will explain how the intelligence expresses itself. And one of the expression or function of the intelligence is doubting. And sometimes we say, doubting is good because it means you're intelligent. It's good. It means you're intelligent, but it means that you're not 100% intelligent. It means that you're still ignorant. Doubt basically means you're not sure, And to openly express your doubts, there is nothing wrong with it, unless and until you do it in a very respectful way. Here, Narada is expressing his doubts about Brahma himself. And it's legitimate. If you have the doubt, you have to express. But you have to know how to express. Actually, in Vedic tradition, this is very important also to know, and this is very essential part of our culture. In Vedic traditions, no questions are prohibited. In other more restrictive and more authoritarian traditions, you cannot ask certain questions, because by asking certain questions, you're expressing doubts about something which you're not supposed to have the doubts. But in Vedic tradition, you're invited to have the doubts about everything. Because unless you are very sincere in doubting, you will never know the truth to the end. So you are invited to ask even uncomfortable questions. But the restriction is there in Vedic culture. You have to know how to ask these questions. There is no bar, there is no ban on asking the questions, but there is definitely very strict rules of how you should inquire. And therefore, Narada Muni here says about himself, I am Anushasitaha. Anushasitaha basically means I am disciplined. I am following you. I am your disciple. This is the same shas. Is the same verbal root in Sanskrit from which shishya comes. Shishya comes from this root shas. Shishya means somebody who is disciplined, who is voluntarily adopting certain discipline to understand the truth. So here we have a very beautiful example of how the process of bhakti works. We have to adopt certain attitude, and we have to become very inquisitive, and we have to respectfully ask the question, and then somebody who is superior to us, being merciful to us, being naturally merciful to us, will reveal us the truth. It's actually very important part of the whole bhakti process, this exchange of mercy. Or the exchange, giving the mercy in exchange of respect and humility. Actually, this is expressed very beautifully by Krishna himself in Bhagavad Gita. He says that at the end of Bhagavad Gita, while finishing this glorious conversation, he says, Sarva dharman parityaja mamekam sharanam praja aham tvam sarva papivyo moksha masu cheha. And this verse is actually the essence of bhakti. Because he says, if you give up everything else, if you surrender to me, I will give you whatever you need. The only requirement is that you have to give up everything else and surrender unto me. And you definitely have to surrender to somebody who can give. There is no point of surrendering to somebody who cannot give. But if you surrender to a proper person, you will get whatever you require. There is a beautiful story in this regard in Sri Vaishnava tradition. Very beautiful and very instructive story about this exchange of mercy for surrender. Once Parashara Bhattar or Parashara Bhatta was a great successor of Ramanuja Acharya. Actually, Ramanuja Acharya, at the deathbed of Yamuna Acharya, he promised to him, when Yamuna Acharya was already dead, but he still was hearing the vows of Ramanuja Acharya. So one of the vows which Ramanuja Acharya gave, he said, I'll write the commentary on Vedanta Sutra and this and that. And he said, I will make one of my disciples named Parashara, the great author of Vishnu Purana. And Vishnu Purana is one of the main scriptures of Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya. So Parashara Bhatta, he became the successor of Ramanuja Acharya. And the story goes like this, that once he, with some of his disciples, a group of his disciples, was traveling through the forest. And in the forest, he met with the hunter. And the hunter, cruel, quite uncivilized person. And the hunter somehow or other stopped him. And he said to this Parashara Bhatta, I see you, you're a big saint. Can you please explain to me something? Something really amazing happened with me today. I caught a rabbit in my trap. And I wanted to kill the rabbit because this is, how I live. This is my profession. I killed somebody. But then somehow or other, the rabbit, he put his ears into my hands, and he somehow or other, actually, I don't know what happened, but somehow or other, the rabbit probably was tied. So he said that the rabbit started circumambulating me in a clockwise direction, and then the rabbit put his little face into my feet and put his big ears into my feet. And he said, I became so moved by this surrender of rabbit. Then I took this rabbit, untied him, and let him go. Can you please explain to me what happened with me? Because I was so, I'm still very moved of this event which happened today. And when Parashara Bhatta heard this inquiry, he lost his consciousness. He fell down, and his disciples, they became very, disturbed, and they trying to bring him back to consciousness. So finally he brought back to consciousness, and they asked him, what happened with you? And he said, very beautifully, he said, look, this cruel hunter, he never promised that he will save somebody who surrenders to him. And this little stupid creature doesn't know, what to do. Still, he surrenders, and this cruel hunter, he, by the fact that somebody is surrendering to him, he is giving everything which he can. Krishna himself promises to us, if you surrender to me, I will protect you by all means, and still we don't want to surrender. It means that we are more stupid than this rabbit. We do not understand that Krishna, who is merciful, this hunter is cruel. He's killing all the time. Still, while seeing this sincere surrender, he manifests his mercy. Krishna is the most merciful. He himself tells us to surrender, and still we don't want to surrender. So this is, again, this is the manifestation, or this is the description of how the bhakti process works. And this whole second canto of Srimad Bhagavatam is about this. It's about to explain to us how we can understand the absolute truths. But there is one more thing. When shall I finish my class? Usually, is it 9? Okay. But there is one more very important thing which I want also to tell in regard to these verses and in regard to this doubt of Narada when he's, and basically the whole purport which Srila Prabhupada gives to this 7th verse, where he says that Narada Muni's doubts were very legitimate. His doubts were legitimate because he saw that his spiritual master, his father, and spiritual master Brahma is engaged in some severe austerities. And austerities basically means that, usually we have very strange understanding of austerity. That austerity means something like Hiranyakashipu. When Srimad Bhagavatam talks about austerity, he definitely doesn't mean the austerity in the sense of Hiranyakashipu. Austerity which is recommended in Srimad Bhagavatam is only one. Austerity which is recommended in Srimad Bhagavatam means meditation on the Supreme Truths. That's the austerity. Concentration on the Supreme Absolute Truth. That's the essence of austerity. And Narada Muni says, I see you're doing this ghoram tapaha. Ghoram tapaha means severe austerity. You don't want, because the mind which is not austere likes to dwell on different subject matters. The best and the most difficult austerity is to concentrate the mind on one tattva. And that's exactly what Narada Muni is seeing while observing Brahmaji, that Brahmaji is really seriously concentrated in meditation on the Absolute Truth. And therefore he says this, seeing your glory and your power in creating this world, I always think that you're the Supreme, but the doubt comes to my mind, maybe you're not Supreme. Brahma will be very happy to admit that he is not Supreme. Srila Prabhupada explains that this is, if your spiritual master is pretending to be the Supreme in front of you, you should spit on his face and forget about him. He is not the real spiritual master, because the spiritual master is teaching you who is the Supreme. The main duty of the spiritual master is to teach you who is the Supreme. And that's another very important point of this whole episode and the whole second canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, that while explaining the importance of the proper process, before understanding the proper process, we really have to be very clear about the proper goal. Usually we say Sambandha Videya Prayojana, but in reality there is Sambandha and there is Prayojana. Abhideya follows from the understanding of these two. Abhideya, the process, is, in one sense, it's most important. We have to understand the Abhideya, the process of sadhana tattva, as I said. But we can only understand properly sadhana if we understand the goal. There is no use of understanding the means before we understood the goal. The goal has to be very proper and clearly established. Then only the inquiry about the goal or about the process is meaningful. So that's a very important point. And here the hint is there, the intention is there, the abhipraya. The intention of this story is to give us the understanding that we have to inquire who is the Supreme, who is the most Supreme. Because the tendency is, when we see somebody who is powerful enough to impress us, right? If somebody is impressively powerful, we may stop our inquiry on this level. Basically, the psychology behind this is that if somebody is powerful and I want to be equally as powerful as him, so I should somehow or other, flatter him, and then he will teach me how to become like him. But the idea here is that, no, we should inquire about the Supreme. And Supreme is one. Supreme is only one, and he is supreme, and he is the most supreme, and nobody is, and supreme doesn't become supreme. Srila Prabhupada, he makes this point which he usually makes. Supreme is not becoming supreme. There is no sadhana to become supreme. There may be sadhana to become elevated, but there is no sadhana to become supreme, because if supreme has to undergo sadhana, he is not supreme. As simple as this. Supreme is supreme always. That's the definition of the absolute truth. Absolute truth is called absolute truth because he is absolute truth always. When you part-time absolute truth, you're not absolute truth. You cannot be part-time absolute truth. Absolute truth means you're absolute truth everywhere, sarvatra, and all the time, sarvada. So that's the definition, and our inquiry has to find out where is this absolute truth which is everywhere, and this absolute truth is always the absolute truth. So one very important point which I should also make, I would like to make here in discussing this, is that as Prabhupada says, that the duty of the spiritual master is to teach about who is the real Supreme, and to show by example how to inquire about the Supreme. And as I said, that this is extremely important because the tendency of a human being, very important tendency which we should be very careful about, the tendency which is there in every one of us, is that we are more concerned with the question how than with the question why. Somehow or other, please listen very carefully, the question why is the most important question. The question why is, first we have to answer this question, why do I want to do something? But we somehow or other, being conditioned living entities, ignorant living entities, we somehow or other, we take for granted that we know why. And we immediately inquire as to how to do something. I once was in a conference, and there was one, it was a big, very highly, very high people participated in this conference, philosophers, scientists, and then the main philosopher, he came to speak, and he said, we are members of very peculiar civilization, peculiar culture. We can answer practically anyhow question. We can go to Mars. We can go to moon, maybe. There is a legitimate doubt about it. We may figure out how to achieve any goal. Unfortunately, we never ask, why do we want to achieve this goal? This question is not very clear. We are in a hurry to find out how. We are in a hurry to find out what is the process, but we don't bother about asking ourselves, why do we want to go there? Sometimes people say, please tell me how I can get married. Being a spiritual master, this is the most common question. Not about the absolute truth, but how to get married. This is very important, how. Please teach me how. Usually the proper answer to this question, why? Why do you want to do it? Are you really sure that you want to do it? And usually people don't ask this question because they want to know. They want to know the process. So, what is the very important implication of this whole story depicted here in this story about Narada Muni is, again, that Narada Muni is really concerned, what is my goal? Is really concerned what is the proper goal of all my inquiries and all my endeavors which I'm doing, the proper goal of sadhana. So, and that's a very important duty of the leader or of a spiritual master or whoever, the teacher who is teaching the truth, is to, first of all, to establish very clearly, this is your goal. This is what you need to achieve. We can see this in the second canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. In the previous chapter, Shukadev Goswami is explaining very beautifully and very clearly that this is the goal, this is the Supreme. He's glorifying Supreme, but basically the implication of his glorifying Supreme is to establish this in the heart of Maharaja Parikshit, who is asking him, this is whom you want to achieve. This is what you want to achieve. And this is, again, the most important thing, the most important duty of the leader. Because what happened, since we are concerned with the process, how this other, this other question, most important question, becomes sometimes vague. And we can see how it happens in other religions. The process of degradation of religion is very clearly seen even in our movement, but in other religions as well. They somehow or other forget what is the higher goal, and they become concerned with the means, with the rules and regulations. We can see this is happening, and we mostly inquire. You should do this, you should not do this and this, do's and don'ts. But we often forget, why do we do this? The proper leader, we can see the example of Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada is a glorious example in this regard because he was very revolutionary about the means. He was ready to adopt any possible means to achieve the proper goal. And the followers, the tendency of the followers is to be concerned with the means, not with the goal. And to be stuck with the means which are established by the founder. Srila Prabhupada, he couldn't care. He was changing the means, the methods, left and right when he saw that this is not appropriate to achieve the goal, but he was very clear about the goal, and he was adopting the means appropriate to this particular goal. So this is again something very important because we are talking about the leaders and we are all taking part in this ILS Sangha. I wanted to say this few words about the importance for the leader again and again and again to remind to followers, and we all leaders in some regard, in some role. We may be, as a family member, we may have our people who are under us, or as temple presidents or whatever. So we should not pretend to be the goal ourselves, because that's the greatest fault of the leader. This is the deadly sin of a leader. I'm the goal. If you want to inquire. I'm all in all. I'm the absolute truth. No, this is the supreme. This is the goal, and we should again and again and again to remind our followers. This is whom you should ultimately reach, whom you should ultimately find in your process of inquiry of the absolute truth. Then only when the goal is clearly established, the flow of devotional service will be unimpeded. Whereas if we become concerned with the means and forgetting about the goal, we will become stagnant. The Ganga is so pure and glorious because it, streams to the goal. And actually, in the third canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, Kapila Muni, he compares the consciousness of a living entity who is engaged in a pure devotional service with the stream of Ganga, which is unimpeded going to the goal, to reach the goal. And in the second canto of Srimad Bhagavatam also, in the process, in the Chaturshloki of Srimad Bhagavatam, where Lord Krishna himself will explain this process to Brahmaji, he will say that you have to search for the goal till you find the goal. You have to search for the goal all the time, sarvatra sarvada, all the time you should search. This is the duty of us. We are students of the Absolute Truth. We have to always inquire about the goal of all our endeavors, and we have to stream to this highest goal, and then only our devotional service will remain pure. We have to know what is the goal, and we have to ask about the goal, and for sure we will reach the goal. The whole point of Srimad Bhagavatam, the Absolute Truth is knowable. You can know the Absolute Truth. You will know the Absolute Truth. You will reach the Absolute Truth. There is no doubt about it. This is the whole idea of Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhakti process. You have to know who is the Absolute Truth and how to reach him. And that's all what we need to know. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. So we have a few minutes for the questions. Yes, please.
Hare Krishna. Maharaj, thank you for the wonderful class. You mentioned two things, 2 points I really inspired me. One is that we have to doubt sincerely. To ask why, not how. So Maharaj, my question is, why is it that I can't doubt sincerely? Like I doubt someone or something, especially someone else, insincerely, out of envy or jealousy or pride maybe. So why is it that I can't doubt sincerely so that I can progress?
Yeah, because as you said, we all have these faults. The sincerity means to admit openly and very clearly my own position, and that's painful for our ego. And therefore, doubting is not a problem. We always doubt somebody else. Whether he is a guru or not, whether he is a real sannyasi or not, whether he is a bhakta or not. Doubting, there is nothing special about doubting other people. But you're right, the motivation of our doubts, we have to be very clear about the motivation. Do we want, by doubting somebody, to drag him down to our level? By denigrating him, or by telling see, you're not what you are, or we sincerely want to ask who you are and please explain to me your proper position. So we have to watch, we have to be on guard, because this tendency is there. We are envious. And that's why it's actually very interesting and very important to know. That's why we easily believe about something bad. When somebody tells us something bad about somebody else, we easily believe him. Whereas when somebody tells something good about, we are not in a hurry to believe it. We usually, if somebody tells us something bad, right. But if somebody says something good, we may inquire, is it really like this? So we have to be on guard that this envy, and yes, the envy can be the cause of our doubts. You are exactly right.
Maharaj, Hare Krishna. Maharaj, I'm here.
Where are you? Oh, okay.
We have to because of time here.
Yeah. Yes, sure.
9 o'clock. Till 9 we have time.
Oh, 3 minutes, I have some announcements to make and we can start the class. Maharaj, thank you so very, very much for your wonderful class, and especially I like the part where you said the goal. We need to know the goal. The goal is right in front of us. Everybody can see the goal. Everybody can see the goal. It's in front of us.